I'm here with Megan Woods, Minister for for Energy and Resources, and current Wigram electorate, which happens to be my home electorate.
That's right, and here we are.
Here we are in Wigram. Yeah, that's great. And I saw you last time about 6 years ago, where we took you for your first drive of an EV.
That's right. Yeah. It kind of feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
And now I've got my own EV.
Now you got your own. So yeah, tell me a bit about that. Like, what have you been up to? Have you done any road trips?
The furthest I've actually taken it is to Tiwai.
To Tiwai from here, nice.
But that probably speaks more about my life.
Yeah.
Just it really don't get the opportunity
trips take a lot
to
of
do
time,
it.
right?
Yeah, don't get the opportunity to do it. But it's a Hyundai Ioniq, and it's got a range of about 330k. So it's pretty good.
Nice, yeah. So did you fast charge when you went down to Tiwai?
No.
No. So
got down there, then charged overnight on trickle charge, actually,
yep.
at someone's house.
Yeah. So how has that personal experience of an EV informed your approach to EV policy with New Zealand?
I think kind of some of the kind of the needs around charging and kind of the way it works in New Zealand, because I think we've got to really consider the context here in New Zealand, how people charge. Like, for example, I don't use public charging infrastructure very often. I recently moved house, and before my charger got installed, I was having to kind of find a supermarket with a charger and things like that. But I think by and large, New Zealanders are charging at home. So I think it's really good to kind of understand those pressure points where you absolutely need that charge, and it is absolutely critical.
I personally find that on long distance is when I need the fast charging network. Yeah. And then apart from that, if it's in Christchurch, the only time you really need a fast charger if you completely stuff up and you forget to charge overnight, and you're like, oh my god, I've got to get out to Ringaroa and I haven't charged the car, I better go to a fast charger.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I find some of the chargers we have in our supermarkets really good. Just that kind of 30 to 45 minutes you tend to be in a supermarket, really good to top up. You're not going to charge it all the way, but it's good to give it that boost, which is really good. But absolutely agree about the fast charger on the kind of the state highway network. So EECA has a EV charging strategy, which is about having, I think we've got chargers every 75 kilometres.
Yeah, so the old standard when they first came out was every 50 to 75.
Absolutely, and we're kind of really rolling that out. Where we're concentrating kind of public funding and government money is in those bits where the market isn't going to deliver, but it is a hole in the network.
So that'd be stuff like Spring Junction, which is going in this year.
Friends. So some of those areas. We did start partnering with ChargeNet to really kick things off to get into some of our tourist hotspots. Which was really important. But, there's a really good commercial proposition for people rolling out chargers now. I think government absolutely has a role, and it's around getting that EV strategy rolled out. But it is about, if we're going to have fast chargers, we're going to have to upgrade transmission or distribution, the connections, to make sure we can get enough electricity into those places that need it.
I think we've got a new fast charging hub that's been built in Blenheim at the moment.
That's right.
And so that's part of the new strategy, is that every 200 to 250 kilometres along State Highway 1, or along state highways, we have those lots of chargers with toilets and amenities and restaurants and stuff like that.
It will kind of be like the place where people stop, and I think that we'll probably see kind of cafes clustering around it. You're going to have people stopping, hopefully not for too long because they're fast chargers, but people will want to go to the loo, they'll want to buy a coffee, they'll want to sit down, maybe get an ice cream. So in the same way that government's never built petrol stations, I think there is a really precise role for government, and it is around making sure that we've got those strong grid connections to allow the kind of electricity input that we need.
So rather than having an individual operator having to pay for those massive costs of upgrading infrastructure, you enable that to happen, and that becomes a more competitive for
absolutely provider. And it could be, these can be reasonably large. There might be a couple of providers there. It's not about us saying who the provider is going to be.
I think the EECA's just partnered with Zero going into some of Upper South Island as well.
That's right. And we know that there's other providers that will go through, and we're seeing kind of quite a lot of innovation too, that we're seeing Ampol do the at-home charger, which they've rolled out in Australia, which I think is really a good concept, particularly for, as we're getting more and more people who have work cars, fleet cars that are EVs. So the idea that the charge is put into your home, and you use the same dongle at your charger at home than you would at one of their public charging infrastructures, which means that as an employee, if you've got a work car, you're not paying for the power.
Yes.
So I think there's some really good innovation and some smart things really starting to happen.
Cool. No, that sounds really good. So, I mean, I guess that's takes us to the policy by National, which is the 10,000 chargers throughout New Zealand. But they say that they're doing that because they think that's the biggest barrier to EV uptake. What do you think about what's the biggest barrier and sort of how effective it is for, them to partner with or pay for 10,000 chargers?
Yeah, and look, I don't think it is the biggest barrier, largely because there is so much work underway in the area.
I mean,
of
we've
chargers.
already got like 250 fast chargers nationwide, right? That's
right, and I think there is a role for government. I don't think it's the role of government necessarily to go and put the chargers in any more than I think government should build petrol stations. As I said, I think it's about making sure we've got the transmission and distribution sorted out, and there is. EECA already have a strategy around how we're doing that. I think it's probably one of those things that sounds quite good in an election manifesto. But I do think that the biggest barrier still, particularly for the people I represent in my electorate, is the difference in price between an EV and an internal combustion engine car.
Yeah.
And that's where that clean car discount, which unfortunately National are saying they're going to get rid of, has been really good of helping people make that change. And in the time that's been in, you will have noticed it too, well, it's changing who buys electric vehicles. It's not kind of young early adopters now. I see a lot of retired people opting for, maybe a second-hand Leaf with quite a limited range, but they're saving a huge amount in petrol that they're seeing that they're kind of, the money they're having to spend out each week. So people with quite modest means, but are doing that kind of whole-of-life cost, but it's that clean car discount.
Well, the other thing that the clean car discount does is it not only helps the vehicles at the moment, so it provides $8,000 off the brand new cars. It provides $3,000 off in cars new to New Zealand. But then that also flows through the second-hand market. So I was selling a 30 kilowatt Leaf recently, and I paid $25,000 for that about 3 years ago. And then now the average median price for a car like that is about $12,000.
Exactly.
So and that car doesn't get the rebate, but because of the value for money you're getting off the cars that are $15,000. Those 30 kilowatt cars are now going for $12,000 because of the value flow through.
Absolutely.
And so you are getting cheaper EVs out there.
And I mean, I've always believed New Zealanders buy second-hand cars. That's kind of a big part of what we've always done in this country. So building that second-hand market to get that mass adoption is so important. That's why every time a government agency or a large company makes a decision to buy a fleet car, a fleet of electric vehicles, we know in 3 to 5 years those cars will enter the second-hand market and really do kind of boost the range and options of EVs that will be available.
Which will help, because if you only rely on the second-hand market for EVs, we are limited by the number of cars coming in. Whereas if we can support new cars coming in to be electric, we will get more variety and more quantity of EVs in New Zealand.
Yeah, and we know the clean car discount has made a difference. The uptick we've seen, it's kind of surpassed anything that we thought would happen with it. Light vehicles make up 21% of our greenhouse gas emissions in New Zealand. We've got to address it, and we're saying this is a policy that is working in terms of our emissions budgets and what we need to do. That's absolutely critical that we don't stop the momentum on that, and I'm worried what will happen. And critically, if any party is going to stop the momentum on that, they're going to have to tell us how they're going to fill that hole in the emissions budget on the other side.
Yeah. And you don't, I guess I can say this from my perspective, is I don't feel like having more chargers is going to do anything to address the people that are on the fence with whether or not they should spend, $10,000+ on buying an EV.
Like, range anxiety is a thing, but I don't think it's the biggest thing. And I think that there's good plans in way to address that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I talk to thousands of people, every, couple of months about EVs.
Yeah.
And the biggest barriers I see for people are the upfront costs and the information out there. So EECA does a lot of great work in terms of actually helping provide an authoritative source for electric vehicles and saying, yes, we have done the studies and EVs are great for New Zealand and they're great for the environment in terms of emissions. And I mean, ACT want to get rid of EECA. So maybe you could, because you're the minister for EECA,
I
right?
am, and I mean, I'm so proud of EECA and the work they've done. I think if we look at an agency that has done so much heavy lifting to bring down our emissions, they're the ones that administer the government investment in decarbonising industry for me. They're taking on the heavy vehicle stuff of what we're doing with freight in terms of the discount we'll give around whether it be electric trucks or hydrogen trucks. The low emission vehicle fund, I call the little fund that could, that has done so much work in terms of really stimulating charging infrastructure and kind of doing a lot of the information and education around EVs, the tools they've built. I think EECA is one of the heroes of our government, and I am so proud of each person that works there. And they're also
one of the only government agencies that actually spurs private investment in these things, right? Because they require 50% for their contestable funding.
Absolutely. So whether that's the Low Emission Vehicle Fund or the government investment in decarbonising industry, it's just really sensible spending. It's actually reducing our emissions, and every tonne of emissions that we domestically reduce mean we don't have to pay another country to do their decarbonisation by buying expensive carbon credits. But the other thing that EECA do, which is so important, is a lot of the thinking about how we're going to balance EVs into our electricity network. What are we going to need to do to make sure that EVs aren't adding to the problem of our evening and morning peaks? Well, it won't be morning. I don't think many people will charge their car first thing in the morning, but particularly that evening peak. When do we need to start introducing smart chargers? How can time of use charging, so people can find it cheaper to charge off peak? A whole lot of that stuff about how we do what's called load shifting and keeping that stability of the electricity network. EECA is so critical, and that's something I've been giving a lot of thought to over the last couple of years, the way in which we can make all this work together. We need to electrify more, but also they've been doing trials on some of the things like the two-way use of EVs. You basically got a big battery sitting in your garage that if the lights go out, how can your EV be part of it, particularly if you've got solar on your roof? So how we can integrate all these things.
Well, that's probably a great place to talk about your solar and battery plan that Labor has. So that's, I believe it's $2,000 for solar and $2,000 for batteries.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me a bit more?
So that it sits up really closely with our deep retrofit program, which is about insulating, double glazing, swapping out gas appliances, which is up to $18,000, and then for the solar, $2,000 for the panels, $2,000 if you get a battery. We do need battery storage in there to keep that stability of the grid there. I think we need to double the solar that we've got at the moment. That's the first aim we have. But the other bit that I'm really excited about, which is another $20 million for our community solar programs. So that's like, how can we have, I was at a place in just out of New Plymouth yesterday that are looking at putting a community solar in, which will share the solar with the local community, with some of the most vulnerable. Looking at doing some trials of what they call solar gardens in Australia, which is if you live in an apartment, you don't necessarily have the roof space to put the solar panel on, but you can have kind of in a public space, you can have solar panels which you rent or lease, and you can use a virtual power plant to get the electrons to you to use. But how we can build resilience for New Zealand and extreme weather events through virtual power plants and solar, and how we can address some of the issues of energy poverty. So there's so many different ways we can do this.
So, I mean, your plan actually ties in quite well with the plan that the Greens have announced, which is also around solar and, you know, insulating houses. So they've got their plan also includes zero interest finance, so as well as the subsidy part, it also includes the zero interest finance, and they also allow for EV charger installation as well, which would tie nicely into using the solar and using the batteries. Is that something that you guys would be able to interest in compromising on or talk about?
I mean, this is stuff we will. I mean, I think that we kind of agree on so much in this space. I personally think that we need to give the grant scheme a chance in terms of the deep retrofit. There's a lot of banks offering 0 or very low percent loans to do this. So I don't want to crowd out what's already happening there. I'd rather use the money for other things. But what we've said is the money's there. We'll check in after a year and see what the uptake on that is like and whether there actually is a need for the government in there, because if there isn't a need for the government, then I'm quite happy to let other people do it. I think the stuff with EV chargers, there's also some policy work that has to be done there. At what point do we regulate and say that actually we've probably got as many EVs that we can have without having some kind of smart charging network going in? What's the balance of carrot and sticks? Should we make part of the clean car discount, part of that be a smart charger network to go into it? So I think there's a range of options. So I want to do a bit more policy work around that, around what the balance of how we can assist people, because we know we can't just keep adding EVs if they're going to add to that winter peak. We've got to make them part of the solution, and they can be, and a really good part of the solution.
We have, in New Zealand, we have about 50% of our EV market is Leafs. And in Japan, it's very commonplace to sort of have off-the-shelf, vehicle-to-grid module, basically, that you just plug into your home system and you plug your car in. But we don't have that kind of framework here, and we've been doing lots of trials to sort of get that off the ground. But as such...
Do you mean the two-way stuff?
Yeah, exactly. So as such, there isn't really anything that, your average consumer can be like, oh, well, I have an EV, I have solar panels, I want to be able to make that work in with my house.
And we've been doing a trial with EECA through that, and I'm really keen for us to start deploying that. So that's all the stuff that I want to bring together with the smart chargers, because it is such an important part of the resilience piece. As we experience these extreme weather events, I want to know if my car's parked in the garage and the lights go off, I've got a way of recycling that electricity back that's stored in my car back into my house. So
cool. No, I think that's something that a lot of EV owners will be happy to hear that's been thought about and discussed.
Absolutely. And so we've had EECA doing the work, because we need to understand how that works with the New Zealand grid. And that's the critical bit, that no grid is the same.
So watch the space, basically.
Totally.
Excellent. All right, so just looking at one of your other policies, you have removing the fringe benefit tax on e-bikes as one of the Labour's policy initiatives. Do you want to speak about that? And also, has there been any work in looking at applying the same policy to EVs? So, for example, workplace usage of EVs?
Yeah. So, look, I mean, obviously the clean car discount is where the focus has gone on in terms of getting people switching into EVs. But one of the things that we do know, if we're going to decarbonise transport, is we need mode shift. So actually we don't have that same discount that applies to e-bikes. So this is looking at what are the different levers that we can use to support people into using that as a
way
form.
of supporting e-bikes.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
The EVs obviously have a lot of support with the clean car discount, and that is a substantial amount of money that's going in there already. It's recycled through, but I think we need to kind of be thinking what's the right lever for all the different mode shifts, like we have with public transport, that we've made it free for under 18, so under 25, that we want to encourage people out of internal combustion engine cars, and we need to use a range of different tools for helping people into that.
Cool. Yeah. So talking about public transport, buses. So Labour has a plan to completely decarbonise the bus fleet by 2035, and you want to have the last diesel bus being imported into the country by 2025. So what's Labour going to do to support that changeover? Yeah,
and look, it's so important. If we have public transport, we know getting people onto buses, first of all, fewer emissions than the same number of people in ICE vehicles, but we need to move those public transport vehicles to being decarbonised. So it is about working, and we've done some work through EECA, through the Low Emissions Vehicle Fund, again, with some of the public transport options. Electric buses, for longer range. Hydrogen's also an option there as well. So one of the things that we're starting to do some work around is how is it that we can build the hydrogen refuelling network in New Zealand, so that does allow for those options to come into play. We're seeing that starting to roll out. We've got Haringa, who are based in Taranaki. We've got Allied, which is part of the Richardson Group down in Invercargill, that are starting to roll out that, and that's largely around freight at this point, but it will be it's the same pressure that you need for buses. So I think there's some good possibilities there.
So I think we have about one hydrogen bus in New Zealand, and we have like 250 electric buses.
That's right. And I think that around cities, electric will be the way, but where we want to think about maybe some of that intercity and between cities, that it may be that hydrogen is is an option there. Look, I think that there is no one or the other in this. I think we have to be making sure that we can support both. We know for heavy freight that hydrogen is a good option. And if there is some parts of our bus network that can use part of that infrastructure as well. But look, I'm open to all comers that decarbonise. So
talking about hydrogen, do you think that at the moment the work that's been done, the money that's been invested into hydrogen, I know there's a like a $10 million green hydrogen plan. Do you think that the money that's been invested into hydrogen at the moment is in terms of the evaluating as an option, or is it more of a we already know that it is an option and we're...
it's deployment.
Right.
We know it's an option.
Okay.
So the money that's there is it's for contract for difference. Some countries have said that they'll put a government subsidy in between the cost of hydrogen and the cost of diesel to make up that contract for difference, and that goes to the people who produce the hydrogen. There's been some absurd outcomes that you can get hydrogen produced with no real end use. So what we've done is we've put it into a contract for difference at point of consumption. So that means we're actually supporting people to buy the hardware, to buy the trucks.
Right.
These are like 20-year investments. If someone buys a diesel truck, it's going to be on our roads for 17 to 20 years. So what can we do to help bridge the gap between purchasing the truck being a hydrogen or an electric truck, so it's both that's there, that are eligible through one part of the scheme. So it really is about creating that demand. I think that a lot of early work around the world went into the supply side of hydrogen. That's really important. I'm confident we can make it. We've got electrolyzers on boats on their way here literally now. Some of them have landed. We've got great companies here in Christchurch doing amazing things in hydrogen. It's really now about concentrating on that demand side. It's kind of like with EVs. We weren't going to get the charging infrastructure till we got the density of EVs. It's kind of build it, if they're there, someone will build it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I mean, I guess I've already covered some of that, but, some countries are just transitioning straight to electric from fossil fuels. So you feel like, like in the government, they see that there's still a valid use case for hydrogen when the battery densities or the battery costs aren't there yet?
I think hydrogen, I think hydrogen in heavy freight probably, because so much of New Zealand's freight isn't just down a main trunk line, in terms of, we need milk trucks to go up and down the valleys. So I think it will be both. Right. I don't think that we have to, both are going to be an amazing part of what we do. I don't see it as one or the other, or that hydrogen is a transition to it. I'm talking about green hydrogen here. Yeah. I'm not talking about hydrogen made with fossil fuels.
The main concern with hydrogen is just that it is a lot more energy inefficient compared to battery electric.
Yeah, and look, one of the things that we know for New Zealand to get to 100% renewable electricity, that we have to overbuild our generation capacity. Hydrogen offers us a way to actually absorb that excess generation that we'll have and turn that into a fuel. It is a way of storing when we can't use it. So it is actually a really important part of how the whole system will fit together. The other thing about hydrogen, you can turn it off and on depending when the peaks are. So if there's really high peak demand for electricity, you can stop hydrogen production and put that generation back into the grid. So it becomes a really important smoothing tool within the market itself.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. That sounds. In effect, it's another, battery in a way. I guess.
Absolutely, we need to have ways to store energy, and hydrogen is one of those ways.
Yeah, I'll throw you a curveball actually. Tiwai Point is a big barrier in New Zealand to, from what I understand from electric companies and networks wanting to invest in new generation because they're like, oh well, if Tiwai Point goes away, then we're not going to be able to pay our millions of dollars of loans. Is there any way to resolve that deadlock of we don't want to do it in case it gets turned off, and we don't want to not do it in case it does?
Look, we've been really actively engaged. This is not a decision for the government.
Yes.
This is a commercial decision that a global multinational, Rio Tinto, will make. We've been as clear as it is possible for any government to have been, and in fact as clear as possible as any New Zealand government has ever been with Rio Tinto. They have a commercial decision to make. There won't be a government subsidy, but for the sake of New Zealand and the sake of the people of Southland, they need to make a decision. It's not fair to keep this on a string. I think that once upon a time, people were worried about 14% because it's 14% of our renewable electricity is used at Tiwai. People were worried about that electricity coming back into the grid. We know we can absorb that in no time. We've also got on and we've built the transmission lines to get it out of that part of the country if we need to move it around, so that it's not not really trapped there. I mean, it would be great if Tiwai made a decision to stay and to decarbonise.
Right.
We've seen that happening at the other end of the country with the steel mill.
Yeah.
That they're working with the government to put in place different technologies. I mean, if we could do that down in Southland, that would be a win-win. So I just want them to make a decision. But we are, I mean, while it's kind of in the back of a lot of people's minds that are making investment decisions around generation, I think we can't shy away from the fact that the Infrastructure Commission has estimated there's about $4 billion worth of generation and transmission projects underway at
currently.
the moment.
So you feel like we have broken that deadlock and kind of moved past it a bit?
Well, it's still a shadow, without a doubt, and I want them to make a decision. And they need to. It's in New Zealand's interest and it's in Southland's interest for them to make a decision. They're at the point where they're having commercial negotiations with various electricity providers. That's not something the government's involved in.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So just last question here. So many EV owners are passionate about the environment and climate change. Do you think our country is on track to avoid the worst case estimates? For global warming, the IPCC has recently called for massively fast tracking our climate efforts and drastically reducing our emissions, or major climate change becomes irreversible. Yeah. Does Labour agree with these warnings, and how will the Labour government meet these challenges?
Oh, look, I mean, I think everybody can just look at the news on any given day.
There are some parties that would do not appear to be reading the news.
No, I mean, we've seen it here. We've seen it in the last week or two in other parts of the world. We can see there's extreme weather events. We've got to go further and we've got to go faster. And I mean, I know for myself in the energy portfolio, I see I've got to have use an analogy, have my foot firmly down. That's why removing emissions from our industrial and process heat, from our electricity network, and doing what the energy sector needs to do to drive the uptake of EVs, absolute passion of mine, and one of the things that really drives me in politics. We've got to keep doing that. When I hear other parties talking about the fact that they're going to use the Climate Emergency Response Fund to fund tax cuts, it really worries me. We've got to do things that show we reduce emissions. What New Zealand has to do is fulfil its international obligations. We've got carbon budgets that will get us there, but we've got to have practical measures that sit there to achieve it. And things like, this car we're sitting in that was bought with a clean car discount are the ways in which we do that.
So, I mean, basically the argument is that New Zealand as a country needs to make tangible reduction in our actual emissions rather than just offset it with...
I mean, I think, one, we don't actually do anything to reduce global emissions, but we are paying other countries to reduce theirs. For me, I'm a Labour Party minister and member of Parliament who's passionate about addressing climate change, and jobs sit at the core of that for me as well. It makes absolute sense for us to be working with partners like New Zealand Steel, buying abatement at $17 a tonne, which I'm not sure where you could buy a carbon credit for $17. But we're keeping those jobs in New Zealand, and we're decarbonising an industry. We're creating a resilient economy by making sure we're making steel here, but it's low carbon steel or no carbon steel. These are the kinds of things that we've got to be doing. We've got to be making sure that we're making sure that decarbonisation doesn't mean deindustrialisation, that we're working with the sector to keep those well-paid jobs. One of the reasons why yesterday when we launched our climate manifesto that we said we'd have a minister for just transitions, because at the centre of that has to be people in their jobs and how it is that we plan for people to have that dignity of a well-paid job within all this change that's going on, something that really drives me.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's a big cause of contention is people fearing this change and resisting that change.
And you know what? I think that decarbonisation and the green economy offers so much opportunity for New Zealand. I was in Taranaki yesterday with the Prime Minister. You know, we went back there 6 years after, as the Minister of Energy, alongside the then Prime Minister Jacinda, we announced that we were bringing an end to new oil and gas exploration. One of the first countries in the world to do it at that point, but now so many more countries are doing it. That's the kind of courage that governments have to have. But I was reflecting yesterday that we were back in Taranaki launching our climate manifesto, talking about energy and the excitement that is felt there about the opportunities around a green energy future, about offshore wind, around hydrogen, around solar, these kind of things. I think you can show how far a community can come, and that they can see that there is a future full of economic possibilities and jobs and wealth creation and all those kind of things. But it's actually about our decarbonised future.
So I mean, it basically sounds like you're trying to say that we have to change at some point, and it's about, do we plan for that change, or do we
wait for it to happen?
Wait for it to be forced upon us.
Yeah, and we can't do that. We've got to be planning. We've got to be making sure we're doing the workforce planning. So one of the other things we announced yesterday is that we want to set up a centre of excellence to train people, often for the skilled trades that are going to be required for the transition we're about to go through. People, I think, have thought a lot kind of about the science and some of the technology. I'm really concentrating now on what are the skills our electricians need to install solar panels. What do our roofers need to know? What do our construction industry need to know around all these kind of things? How can we make sure that we've got a workforce that is kind of all pointed in the direction of decarbonisation?
No, that sounds really good. I guess that's pretty much all my questions. So is there anything you want to say just in terms of...
I really like the new car.
Thank you.
And it's great to be out here with you 6 years on, pointing to all the changes we have been able to make.
Yeah.
I think we probably talked 6 years ago about whether there was a role for government to support people to buy EVs. And here we are. We've got to keep it.
Make some progress and room for more.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much,
Thanks a
Will.
lot for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.